First, many scholars add about 167 years of missing timeline between the two Batei Migdash, the two temple periods. Without going on a tangent, there seems to be obvious years missing that are unaccounted for in the Persian historical evidence, including the obvious. How does Esther's son Darius allow the temple to be rebuilt if he was not even born at the time of the Purim episode, and the Purim episode took place at the final years of the 70-year exile? Also, he was supposedly Darius II. When was Darius I? Second, while the Torah's timeline is specific, after that we rely on the Talmudic scholars who dated backwards, counting from one Kohen Gadol to the next, and relying on certain benchmarks of Greek and Roman history. The timeline can be off by a few decades or even a few centuries. Accordingly, from 70, the date of the destruction of the end of the First Roman-Judean War, to the destruction of the First Temple, was closer to 650 years, rather than 488 years. Many scholars believed that the Second Temple period was more than 585 years, and not the mere 420 years as brought down by the Talmud. Similarly, the 70-year exile was not merely 70 years. The 70-year period was a specific drought in Jewish sovereignty. The total years between the exile and the building of the Second Temple could be a couple of centuries long. That would push the Exodus to 1312 BCE, to 1480 BCE, or even to 1530 BCE based on these calculations. Further, Talmudic scholars believe the time in Egypt was actually only 210 years from the time when Yaakov, descended to Egypt. They have calculation for the 430 years mentioned in the Bible, saying commenced actually when Abraham entered Canaan and had the covenant of the parts, the Bris Ben Absarim. However, if the 430 years are taken literally, and for the commencement of bondage, that means that the death of Joseph and the commencement of bondage was not 1455 BCE, but closer to 1900 BCE. The year from the Great Flood to the death of Joseph are more specific in the Torah, and that is 655 years. Thus, the years from King Solomon to the Great Flood are 1565 years. That puts the Great Flood at the year 2568 BCE. Just to put things in perspective, the Great Flood of China under Emperor Yao is said to be around 2300 BCE. The Epic of Gilgamesh and the Babylon version was written in 2000 BCE, so probably dating back to also 2200 or 2300 BCE. Since the Egyptians were descendants of Ham, Noah's son, the Egyptian Empire could not have started earlier than this date. Yet the Old Kingdom is said to be dated back to 2649. That's 919 years not accounted for. Perhaps we can look at the Egyptian dating system to see if there are any flaws. After all, we only commenced really learning about the ancient Egyptian history and their calendar system in the 1800s. Egyptians kept an uncorrected lunar calendar, meaning they did not add a month to keep the months in line with the solar year. When counting from pharaohs, years overlapped, just as they did for the kings in the Bible. A king of one day before the new year was considered to have already gone through 1 year. So 1 year that saw 2 pharaohs rise could be counted as 2 years. Further, scholars state that the years cited in Egyptian history between events are not necessarily solar years, so Egyptian history is shorter than thought. Finally, there are 2 types of pharaohs in Egypt. There was the all-powerful pharaoh of the entire country. Then there was also the local nomarch,